Thank you so much for the welcoming speech, Dr. Tak. We'll now commence with the morning session, which includes one keynote address and two presentations. The keynote address will be given by Dr. David Wong, the country director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control in Korea. Dr. Wong is a pediatrician and is an epidemiology intelligence service officer. He has a background in the U.S. Public Health Service as a captain, which is equivalent to a colonel in the Army for those of you who are familiar with the military. As the current country director of U.S. CDC in Korea, he's working with the Korean and the U.S. government organizations in the area of global health security agenda. Please welcome Dr. Wong.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak today. I'm really excited to be here. I actually just moved to Korea about 2 weeks ago, and I'll be here for the next 2 years working on global health security and other projects. I hope to work with many of you in the future. I think it's helpful to start my talk with providing a little more context about my agency, the US CDC, and our role in international health. CDC is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. It's one of the few U.S. government agencies not based in Washington, D.C. And there are about 15,000 U.S. CDC employees, and about 350, or roughly 2 to 3% of our employees, are actually stationed in other countries. And if you look at this map and you focus on the light pink or the salmon-colored countries, those are countries where we have at least one US CDC person working. And I think you can see some patterns here in terms of where we have our staff located internationally. We have a large number of people in Africa, Southeast Asia, and that's not a coincidence. A lot of this is driven by two factors. One is funding. So we have several large executive or presidential directives to fund and support specific diseases. One of them is a program called PEPFAR, which works on HIV/AIDS. That's probably our largest program, and many of our staff in Africa work on HIV and AIDS. Two of the other big programs are global tuberculosis, malaria, and then smaller programs include things like global immunizations, field epi training program to develop workforce capacity in epidemiology. Influenza has staff internationally. And also global health security agenda, which was created a few years ago. We have staff in other countries as well. If you also look here, I think it's very evident from where we have our staff that for the most part, CDC places our staff in developing countries. Countries that maybe need more support, that lack resources on their own to do some of the necessary work for things such as global health security. And that's very different to my position here in Korea, because Korea is not a developing country. And so why am I here? I'm not sure if any of you are asking that question. But my position is very unique. It's actually a collaboration between the Department of Defense and CDC. And so the Department of Defense pays for my salary because they're very interested in protecting the US forces. There are many of them here in Korea. But in the process, I think I'll have an opportunity over the next 2 years to really experiment with how CDC can work with other developed countries, not only to improve public health infrastructure here in Korea, but also to work together to see how we can better work on our ODA packages and to support these other countries that need our resources more. And so that's my context that I feel hopefully will be helpful as you think about how we might work together. My goal in this talk is really to give everyone here in this room some background about global health security agenda. I think many of you are already aware of it, but not everyone, so I'll spend a few minutes giving everyone some basic background. And then I hope that you will get some ideas and insights about how you can work with other agencies here in Korea, with other businesses, since we're giving this talk here at KCCI, and also particularly with my agency, with US CDC. Even though I'm just one person here in Korea, we have 15,000 people in Atlanta and other places who I can call on for support in different areas of subject matter expertise, as well as in other countries that we may want to partner with. And then, because this session really is focusing on public-private partnership, as both Ms. Kim and Dr. Tak talked about, I want to spend a little bit of time with some ideas about how we can move forward with that specific topic. Global Health Security Agenda was launched in February 2014 by the US and 28 other countries. And the goal was very ambitious and very important, and that was to accelerate progress towards a world safe and secure from infectious disease threats, and to promote global health security as an international priority. And this is not really a new concept, but I think what GHSA did was really reinvigorate what had already been forming over the last few years. And as you know, with the recent Ebola, MERS, and Zika outbreaks, there have been very specific and dramatic examples of how outbreaks everywhere, or anywhere are outbreaks everywhere. That's a phrase we often use in GHSA, is that we cannot just protect ourselves as a country, or as Korea, or as US. Countries don't live in a vacuum. So in order to really protect the world from infectious diseases, every single country has to have minimum standards for preventing, controlling, and detecting infectious diseases. And that's really at the core of what GHSA is about. Now, since 2014, the number of countries that have signed on officially to GHSA expanded, now up to 55 countries as of November 2016. And if you look at this map, I think it's interesting. It's different than the map I showed earlier about where we place CDC employees. We see a lot more of the countries that are signed on are developed countries like Australia, Japan, Canada, many countries here in Europe. A lot of countries in Africa, some are signed on to GHSA, but many need to be added as well. And I think that really speaks to the need of additional resources and assistance from other countries like US and Korea, so that many more of these countries in Africa and other parts of the world can sign on to GHSA. A question I often get is, what's the difference between GHSA and international health regulations? Some of you may be familiar with that. International health regulations has been around longer than GHSA. It started in 2005 after the SARS outbreak, and really became a legal instrument in 2007. And many of the same principles of GHSA are in IHR, where we try to encourage countries to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious diseases. But something that we found very limiting was that international health regulations lacked what I call teeth. There wasn't really a rigorous process for countries to really hold themselves accountable for whether or not they were achieving the topics and core capacities that were addressed in IHR. And each year, countries were asked to assess themselves. And it was just done on their own. There were no criteria or guidelines provided about how to do these assessments. And countries were asked to score themselves, 0 to 100 on these 13 core capacities. And many countries, including US, I think we just would say, okay, we're doing well in zoonotic diseases, or we're doing well in disease surveillance, so we're going to give ourselves 100, And not really much specific thought about finding what those gaps are, or figuring out how we can always improve. Because I'm a believer that no one's ever perfect. Every country has room for improvement. And in order to really improve, you have to take the time to understand what your needs and gaps are. And so what GHSA basically does is provides a framework, a very practical framework to international health regulations. And the three main parts are a more rigorous self-evaluation process, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. A peer review process, so instead of just countries looking at themselves, others from other countries take a look at their programs and do an evaluation. And this evaluation is very important to GHSA because not only is it done by external bodies, it's also voluntary and transparent, because we believe in the global health community, as I'm sure many of you here in this audience believe as well, that in order to really improve global health, we cannot hide information. We cannot be embarrassed about outbreaks that countries tried to control and did not. Everything has to be shared very openly and transparently so that all countries can help each other. Now, the U.S. commitment to GHSA is quite large. It's $1.6 billion US over a 5-year period. And the three main agencies in the U.S. that are working on this are CDC, of course, Department of State, and USAID, which is our equivalent of KOICA. Some of the money has been redirected recently for Zika, but again, this money is always shifting, so I'm not sure how that will affect in the long run. Some just big picture items I want you to understand is that in the U.S., we divide our efforts for GHSA into what we call phase 1 and phase 2 countries. This is unique language to the US. And what's important is that all this money, the $1.6 billion, is only earmarked for these 17 countries. And so all of these countries, for example, we have staff that are located in these countries that are really focused on GHSA for the next 5 years, next 3 years, to really develop programs, work with in-country partners, NGOs, etc. Now, later, after we picked these 17 countries, CDC developed what's called phase 2 countries. And these were other countries that we felt there were great needs, but there was no specific funding. CARICOM stands for Caribbean Community, and that's a regional organization that is made up of about 20 different Caribbean countries, including some in Central America and South America. And so we talk about in the US, for the most part, our work is focused on these 31 countries plus CARICOM in terms of our efforts, but really the bulk of it is focused on these 17 countries because that's where the funding is. Now we're trying to work with other groups. G7, for example, which includes the US, has committed very early stages to supporting an additional 76 countries to fill in that map I showed you earlier so we get more and more pink-colored countries signed on to GHSA. And we also, of course, appreciate KOICA and Ms. Kim's comments earlier about the $100 million that Korea has committed to 13 countries. That's a big help, and Korea actually is the second largest country to donate and commit funds to GHSA after the US. So the practical framework for GHSA is centered around these 3 areas that I mentioned earlier: prevent diseases, detect diseases, and respond to these infectious diseases. And I'll just take a little minute here. You guys can read this. There are what we call 11 action packages or focus areas. This is to help countries when they're doing their evaluations and for the external evaluators to really have specific areas that we think are the most important for, if countries can address all these 11 areas well, then they'll have a very strong country health system. And so I think all of these will make sense to many of you. The 3 that, for example, Ms. Kim mentioned with KOICA, immunization, workforce development, national laboratory system, those are all very crucial. Some other ones with zoonotic diseases, preventing diseases from animals to humans. About 70% of all emerging diseases originate in wildlife or other animals. Another important one I want to mention here that we spend a lot of effort on at CDC is emergency operations centers. That's something that here in Korea, there was not an emergency operations center until after the MERS outbreak. And now there's a large effort at KCCI to create a new building, develop a new staff and new technologies so that when emergencies do happen in Korea, they can be responded to and tracked much better. And there's actually a delegation from Korea that's going to be visiting the US EOC in early December. Now in the US, we have many agencies that work on GHSA. This is a very busy slide, and I don't expect you to read all this, but it just shows you that there are many different pieces and different groups that we reach out to as stakeholders and potential partners in this effort. And the big ones, as I mentioned earlier, are CDC and Health and Human Services, State Department, and USAID. But on top of that, we also, because of the security aspects and the bioterrorism aspects of global health security, Department of Defense is quite engaged. And then with things such as zoonotic diseases and antimicrobial resistance, Department of Ag is a big stakeholder in those kinds of action packages. And just for your knowledge here, I included in yellow the equivalent agencies here in Korea. So you can see how they might be potentially involved. Some of these agencies are already engaged with GHSA, but of course we can always reach out more to these folks and make sure that the participation is stronger. Dr. Tak mentioned earlier too, I just want to put in my personal plug, that GHSA is a multi-sectoral approach. That's something that, again, is a slight improvement from the international health regulations, which was very more focused on ministries of health. With global health security, we really want to engage these other partners in many different sectors with the realization that we cannot truly have global health security unless all these different partners are engaged and working together as best as possible. And the non-governmental and private sector partners are just as crucial, in my opinion, as the government partners. Now, I'll take the next 10-15 minutes or so to talk about some of the US ROC priorities that I believe I'll be working on for the next few years here. And I want to just give a shout out to Korea, because Korea, along with the US, has been really one of the major leaders of GHSA. They were one of the original 10 countries that are part of the steering group, and those countries are listed here. They're going to be the chair of the steering group starting in January of 2017, and that will last for the entire calendar year. Last year, maybe some of you may have attended, there was a second high-level GHSA meeting, they call it the ministerial meeting. Seoul hosted that in the middle of the MERS outbreak and had 400 attendees from 46 countries. And that was during the time when they President Park committed the $100 million for the Safe Life for All program. So Korea really is a very visible and active partner in this effort. The chairmanship year, I think, is going to be a really exciting time for Korea and for my role here, working in Seoul. Korea's already started, the current chair right now is Indonesia, and there's going to be a handoff meeting sometime in December to kind of transition some of the activities that Indonesia has been working on and make sure that Korea is aware of what those activities are. But Korea's already started to develop and think about what they will do next year. And so I want to share what I know already, is that there's been an interagency task force created which will organize and plan agendas for 5 steering group meetings. In the past 2 chairs have been, before Indonesia, the next chair before that was Finland. And those countries have each had 3 steering group committee meetings a year. But of course, Korea, being Korea, up the ante. And so now they wanted to do 5 meetings. And so, again, this is an opportunity for more countries to become engaged. And what they've already set, and maybe these are meetings that some of you may be able to attend, there's going to be a meeting at the end of January, I think it's January 21st, at Geneva. And again, they like to piggyback these meetings with existing meetings at World Health Organization, knowing that many countries are already sending delegations to these meetings. And then in May, there's the large World Health Assembly, which the Saturday before, there's going to be a steering group meeting. Right now, there's one meeting that will be in Seoul, and that's going to be called the WHO Global Health Security Meeting. I think there'll be lots of opportunities here for many of us here in the room to think about activities or programs we might want to provide during that time period. And then the 4th ministerial was decided in Rotterdam, which was held last month. That was the 3rd ministerial, Rotterdam, Netherlands. Uganda will host that meeting sometime in September. Now, the other really interesting and potentially impactful portion of being a chair is that Korea will get to choose 2 to 3 different projects, which will be their initiatives. And they'll spend more time working on that. They'll encourage the other steering group countries to work on these initiatives. And just to give you an example, Finland, when they were the chair 2 years ago, their main initiative was to really create the external evaluation they call now the Joint External Evaluation Program. And Finland has continued to this day to be one of the lead countries in developing the JEEs. And then this past year, Indonesia, their main initiative was to create a better communication for specific action packages. And so what that meant is that of the 11 action packages, there were what's called lead countries and contributing countries, but some of those action packages were very active in that process, so that was their main thing. So it'll be interesting to see what Korea decides will be their initiatives, but I think whatever they decide, as a community, there may be some opportunities to work with them on those, because we know that will be one of their main focuses. I talked earlier about the JEEs and the Joint External Evaluations, and there's a big push from the US and from Finland and others to have more countries complete these external evaluations. And as of May of this year, there had only been 6 countries that had completed it. And so it's a kind of a slow process. We're only doing maybe 3 or 4 countries a year. But knowing that the global health security agenda is really only a 5-year commitment at this time, we don't know what will happen after that 5-year period. There's a strong effort to get more and more countries to complete these JEEs in the next year. And so the goal is to have 50 completed by December 2015. Korea is going to finish theirs hopefully in December. And that's on average about 2 to 3 JEEs per month, which is a lot of work. As many of you know, the NGO will do all that planning to get identify the external evaluators, set up the evaluation, which is usually about at least a week in each country. There's a ton of logistical work and effort and planning needed. And so there's a whole team of folks at both WHO, Finland, and US that are trying to figure out how to coordinate this effort. But I want to make sure that you're aware of it. And then as these JEEs are completed, they get put on this publicly available website on WHO. And here you can see the 6 countries that initially already completed their JEEs. And then as the others complete, they're going to be added to this. And anyone can look on these websites and see, what are the strengths of this country, what are the weaknesses. And I think it's for the people that are at NGOs here in the room, if there are countries that you're working with or countries that you'd like to work with, please take a look at these JEEs. They're going to give you a lot of detailed information and background that may be otherwise very difficult for you to get. So I want to make sure you're aware of this resource. Knowing that we're going to be doing so many more JEEs over the next year, WHO has developed a JEE tool. This is about a 100-page document, publicly available. And besides the 11 action packages, it also includes 8 other areas that were spelled out in the international health regulations, which WHO did not feel were adequately addressed by the 11 action packages. And those include things like food safety, risk communication, chemical and radiological events. Those were a little bit of gaps in terms of the 11 action packages, so they're added in the JEE tool. And this will serve as the transparent and open baseline for where the country's capacity is for addressing infectious diseases. And the goal is that then once this baseline is done, it can be repeated every 5-10 years, something like that, to see what progress has been made. And hopefully during that time period, they've been able to find discrete country plans and action steps to improve and the gaps that were identified and to find partners to assist with this effort. I don't want to get into all the details, but I think some of you may have questions just about what the JEE looks like, how is it scored. And so just really quickly, if you want more details, I would encourage you to go look at that JEE tool document. But the way it's set up is each action package and technical area is scored 1 through 5. And these are the descriptions. And for each action package and area, there are a lot of questions, very specific questions that each country needs to answer. And as you answer those questions, you think about your impression in terms of where do you fall on the spectrum. Obviously, we want countries to be in the 4 to 5 area, but that's not the case in every country. There are some areas where certainly, unfortunately, there's absolutely no capacity in certain areas, or maybe there's limited capacity. So this is something that we will work on, and it's scored both by the country and then it'll be scored later by the external team. Now, in the next 5 minutes or so, I want to touch again on public-private partnerships. We've realized at GHSA that funding for the US is only through 2019. Unclear what's going to happen after that. We hope that we'll find other partners that can support this effort. I'll skip that because we already talked about KOICA, but one thing that I want you to be aware of is what's called the Private Sector Roundtable. And this was developed by GHSA last year, and it was really to mobilize the private sector partners with GHSA. The first 2 companies that signed on were Johnson & Johnson and General Electric, GE, so very large American companies. And now there are 17 companies that are members of this, and most of them are US or European companies. And one of the things I want to work on here, and KCCI is a really good opportunity to engage with, is to find more Korean companies, and even small, medium-sized companies, which none of them are part of this 17 groups, from these various sectors, to have them at least be aware of GHSA and be part of this work roundtable so they can be a part of this forum to share experiences and come up with other ideas for how we might work together. Next year we're planning to do some work with the embassy. So that I sit at the embassy, US Embassy here in Seoul 2 days a week. And our economic section, the econ section, which is my group, we've actually identified engaging the private sector with GHSA as one of our priorities for the next 6 months. So again, this is something that we hope to have maybe some meetings with the ambassador or other staff at the embassy, meeting some private companies in Korea. We hope to do events at next year's steering group meeting. And then this is Raymond Martin is the company that's it's a consulting strategy company out of New York City that is running the private sector roundtable. And so these are the main leads. But if you guys have any questions or ideas, please let me know and I can connect you with that private sector roundtable. We can work together. Now, I also want to just talk the last few minutes about, I think it's important in order to really engage private sector, it's one thing to just have them be aware of GHSA. I think it's even stronger if we can find discrete activities that really resonate with them, that they can see themselves participating in. And one idea that I'm working on right now to explore whether or not there's interest here in Korea is called EpiHack. And this is what you might think it sounds like. It's a hackathon where you bring together IT folks and app developers, but instead of working on developing games or entertainment systems, which some of those hackathons are about, this hackathon focuses on public health issues and how IT solutions, particularly in undeveloped countries, can be developed through these very short 3 to 4 day EpiHacks. And the group that's really spearheaded this is Skoll Global Threats Fund, which is based in San Francisco, founded by the first president of eBay. And they've had 8 EpiHacks so far. These have all been in developing countries, and these are some of the topics. Specific infectious diseases, mass gathering surveillance, One Health. And what they do is they recruit, working with a local NGO in country, they find key partners and stakeholders to come together in a very unique setting, and then they develop different programs. And once these programs are developed from the EpiHack, they're publicly available. So anyone can take that code and then build off of it. And so just to show you pictures, this is the EpiHack that was done in Laos, addressing dengue fever. And so the first day, they have a lot of talks about what the hackathon methodology is. They have people talking about the health system, talking about some of the issues, and just give everyone the same background so that they can think about how to develop products. Then over day 2 and 3, these different sectors, with mostly IT and public health, get together and brainstorm and try to develop code and apps by the end of the week. And then there's this sharing period on the last day where folks can have feedback on their apps that are developed, and then certain apps then become shared publicly on through the Skoll website. So this is something that even though Korea is not a developing country, we have a lot of excellent IT folks here and companies that could really contribute to this. So this is something that I'd like to explore both with Ministry of Health as well as with specific companies, if we could host an EpiHack here in Korea during the chairmanship year. And so just with final thoughts, I hope I gave you some good ideas or just background information that you can think about. My contact information is here, my email, and please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I'll be working very closely with Dr. Tak over the next 2 years, so you can also reach him as well. And so I just want to emphasize that over the next 2.5 years, as I'm working here with Korea on GHSA, I think one of the main issues from the US side will be ensuring that the quality and integrity of JEEs and the GHSA process remains high, and that the sustainability and how we're going to support GHSA after 2019 and 2020, those are questions that are still unanswered. And so those are things that the US are really looking forward to, including from the NGO world and from the private sectors.